whatever your thing. It could be anything. Canva helps you make that thing a thing. Canva is a simple online tool thing. It's a way to design with our magic AI tool things. You can social media your thing, generate images or videos of your thing, make decks for presentations to show your thing. Whatever needs to be done for your thing, Canva can make it an even better and bigger thing. Canva, the thing that makes anything a thing.
You survived the Miami weekend, nailed the speech, and maxed out your credit card in the name of friendship. Now you've got one hangover, 4 pastel dresses, and 0 reasons to wear them again. Sell them on Depop. Just snap a few photos, and we'll take care of the rest. And you at least get some of your dignity, money back. Someone on Depop wants what you've got. Start selling now. Depop, where taste recognizes taste.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I discuss cases involving military members and veterans. And I do this to remind us all to remain vigilant always. If you're new here to the show, welcome. I want you all to know that for nearly 7 years, I've covered military-connected cases, not only because I am interested in the story behind the story, but because I believe there is something to be learned from every tragedy. Understanding how and why these events happen can sometimes help us think differently about our own safety. It can help us think differently about our own awareness and the choices that we make when faced with the unpredicted. Today, we're discussing the recent active shooter attack at Old Dominion University. It's a case that struck me for several reasons, not only because the victims were Army ROTC cadets and their professor, Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah, but because this is one of those cases where a handful of people made decisions in a matter of seconds that likely changed the outcome for everyone else in the room. As you'll hear throughout today's episode, this is a story about courage, leadership, sacrifice, and the split-second choices people make when confronted with unimaginable violence. So without further delay, join me as I discuss the tragic shooting at Old Dominion University that claimed the life of Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
There's a moment before violence when everything still feels peaceful, ordinary. Not peaceful in a dramatic way, just normal. On March 12, 2026, at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, it was the Thursday right before spring break, the kind of day when students are thinking about lunch, travel plans, and getting through one last class before leaving campus. Inside Constant Hall, a group of senior Army ROTC cadets were finishing a routine morning session. After the last cadet briefing, Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah, the instructor, was wishing everyone a happy spring break as everyone gathered their belongings, when suddenly a man walked into the classroom. Some cadets later described this man as nervous-looking. He wasn't a cadet running late to class. In fact, he wasn't a cadet at all. As people turned toward the doorway, the man asked a simple question: "Is this the ROTC classroom?" Someone indicated yes, and within seconds, the man reached into his waistband, pulled out a Glock 44 pistol, shouted Allahu Akbar, and opened fire. The first shots were directed toward Lieutenant Colonel Shah, then towards the cadets. In an instant, the classroom became chaos. Cadets dropped to the floor, some dove under desks, others struggled to process what was happening, because for a split second, the mind does what it often does in a crisis. It searches for the least terrifying explanation. Is this the drill? Is this training? Is this even real? But Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah recognized the threat immediately. While others were still reacting, Shah moved toward the gunman. And that split-second decision may be the reason the attack was not far deadlier. When it was all over, Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah had been mortally wounded. 2 cadets had been injured, and investigators would discover that the gunman was someone federal authorities already knew. His name was Mohamed Bailor Jalloh. To understand the emotional weight of what happened inside Constant Hall, you have to understand what ROTC is supposed to be. ROTC is short for Reserve Officer Training Corps, and it is the beginning of a military leadership pipeline. It's also a recruiting tool. ROTC is not only a commissioning source, but it's an incentive for many and an opportunity to fund an undergraduate education in exchange for a 4-year military commitment after commissioning. For me, as an ROTC commissionee, it was how I paid for college. So I completely understand the way that these programs become more than just classes. They become a part of your identity, a part of your future. During ROTC, cadets learn how to think under pressure before anyone depends on them in the real world. They learn how to communicate early, make decisions with incomplete information, and take responsibility before rank makes that responsibility official. Cadets in ROTC study tactics, they learn field skills, they practice casualty care, or as we call it, first aid buddy care. But underneath all of that is a deeper lesson. Leadership is not about looking calm when life is real. It's about acting when everyone around you is frightened, confused, or waiting for direction. At ODU, the Army ROTC program is known as the Monarch Battalion, and in 2026, the officer leading those cadets was Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah. And the thing about this is that Shah's story was deeply tied to Old Dominion because he had once been an ODU ROTC cadet himself. So, who was Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah? At the time of his death, Shah was 41 years young. He was born on October 26, 1984 in Fairfax, Virginia, to a Pakistani-born father and an American mother. But his mother, Judith Jenkins, told WHSV News that his roots were firmly planted in the Staunton and Augusta County area. Shah was mostly raised by his mother, grandparents, and uncles after his father passed away. Shah's family has deep military roots. Shah's family culture valued service, sacrifice, and patriotism. So Shah ran with that, and in 2003, he enlisted in the Army as an aviation operations specialist. He quickly distinguished himself, rising to the rank of sergeant, but he wasn't content to stop there. He set his sights on becoming a military officer. So in 2005, he enrolled at ODU and was part of the Army ROTC unit. In 2007, he not only earned a degree in sociology, but he commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. He then became an Apache helicopter pilot, which is described as one of the most demanding roles in Army aviation. Over the course of his career, he supported operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Eastern Europe, logging more than 1,200 flight hours, including roughly 600 combat hours in hostile environments. The New York Post reported that throughout his career, Shah earned more than 17 military decorations, including the Air Medal with Valor, an award reserved for acts of heroism during aerial flight. But education was his passion, and he never stopped learning. Fox 5 DC reported that while serving, Shah earned an MBA from the University of Georgia and then completed a master's degree through the University of Kansas. By the early 2020s, Shah had spent years in demanding operational assignments, and by this point, he was married and had a young son. In 2022, he returned to ODU as a commanding officer and head of the Army ROTC Monarch Battalion. He also served as professor of military science and chair of the Military Science Department. Now, these titles, they may sound academic, but in ROTC, it means something more personal. It means that Shah was not only teaching coursework, he was shaping future military officers before they even stood in front of soldiers of their own. And by all public accounts, Shah took that responsibility extremely seriously. On March 12, 2026, Shah was doing exactly what he had returned to ODU to do. He was mentoring cadets. He was preparing them for leadership. He was walking them through practical military briefings, the kind of exercise designed to teach young officers how to organize information, communicate intent, and make decisions. According to the Army's later account, Cadet Wesley Myers had arrived early to set up his presentation. Shah had briefed the class on how the class presentations would proceed, and then each cadet gave their respective presentations on combatant commands. Eventually, after the students gave their presentations, the class began to wind down and prep for transitioning. And then Shah said something ordinary. He wished the cadets a good weekend and a happy spring break and mentioned he would be having surgery, so they might not see him for a while. It was a passing comment, the kind of small human detail that people normally forget, except that on this day, class did not end normally.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Athletic Brewing Company crafts award-winning non-alcoholic beers for those who want to be part of every round. With over 185 flavor awards, they're exceptional NA beers that fit your lifestyle and any social occasion. Summer's full of good times, and Athletic fits right in. Go to athleticbrewing.com to have brews delivered to your door, or find them at a bar, restaurant, or store near you. Near beer. Athletic Brewing Company. Fit for all times.
The investigation into the ODU campus attack was investigated differently. But to understand why investigators immediately treated the shooting differently, we have to go back nearly a decade. Mohamed Bailor Jalloh was 36 years old at the time of the shooting. He was from Sterling, Virginia, and according to the Department of Justice, he served in the Virginia Army National Guard as a specialist, and he served from 2009 until 2015, where by all accounts he served honorably, and he even went on to receive an honorable discharge from the military. Now, that military background is part of what makes this case so unsettling. Jalloh had served honorably, but after leaving the military, he pled guilty in federal court to attempting to provide material support to ISIS. That's right, prosecutors said that Jalloh previously praised attacks on U.S. military members, referenced Fort Hood, and even admired the 2015 Chattanooga shooting that killed various service members. Well, the thing about this is that after pleading guilty, Jalloh was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. But due to a federal prison drug treatment program, he was released from prison early. So let me tell you a little bit more about the 2016 case against Jalloh. According to a DOJ press release from 2017, Jalloh told an FBI confidential informant that he decided not to reenlist after listening to online lectures by Anwar al-Awlaki, a deceased al-Qaeda leader in the Arabian Peninsula whose propaganda has appeared in multiple radicalization cases. The shift, according to federal authorities, did not stop at consuming extremist content, though. Prosecutors say that after communicating with ISIL members overseas, Jalloh traveled to Nigeria where he met an ISIL member. That person introduced Jalloh to someone in the United States whom Jalloh believed was connected to extremist activities. But guess what? That person in the U.S. was actually working with the FBI. And that is how the federal case began. And this was around March of 2016. While Jalloh was communicating with the person connected to the FBI, he allegedly discussed violence in direct terms. He said that he thought about conducting an attack all the time. He said he had been close to conducting his own attack and said he knew how to shoot a gun. Now, in 2026, because authorities had documented those conversations way back in 2016, when Jalloh walked into that ROTC classroom in 2026, it appeared the military connection was not incidental. According to DOJ circa 2017, Jalloh also discussed timing an operation during Ramadan and said such operations were 100% the right thing. He asked for help sending money to ISIL and provided a $500 prepaid cash transfer to someone he believed was associated with the terrorist organization. Thankfully, in reality, that money went to an FBI operative. And not only was he offering funding help, but Jalloh even went out looking to buy a rifle. On one occasion, he was turned away from buying a rifle because he didn't have the proper paperwork. But guess what? That didn't stop him, because eventually he went back and purchased a different rifle from a different company, although by that point, he was under the watchful eye of authorities. And while he did walk out of the store with a rifle, it was inoperable and he was arrested the very next day. In October of 2016, Jalloh pled guilty to attempting to provide material support to ISIL. In February of 2017, Jalloh was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison and 5 years of supervised release. At the time, the case looked like a success story for counterterrorism enforcement. A threat had been identified, a plot had been disrupted, and a defendant had pled guilty. The system looked like it worked. But that was not the end of Mohamed Jalloh's story. When Jalloh was sentenced, prosecutors asked for a 20-year sentence. They argued that he had made multiple attempts to join ISIL and had attempted to acquire a gun to carry out a murder plot. But the judge sentenced him to 11 years, with credit for the time he had already spent in custody since his arrest in July of 2016. I mean, listen, 11 years is a significant sentence, but federal sentences are not always served day for day. Inmates can receive credit for good conduct. Some can qualify for programming incentives. And in certain circumstances, treatment programs can actually reduce the amount of time a person spends in prison. But after the Old Dominion shooting, the public question became, how did someone convicted in an ISIS-related case get out of jail early? You see, Jalloh was released from federal custody on December 23, 2024. Actually, he had been transferred to a residential reentry center in the Baltimore area in August of 2024, before his full release in December. And from that point until the Old Dominion shooting, he was on supervised release. Now, let's talk about supervised release. Supervised release is a period of court-ordered monitoring after incarceration. During this period, a defendant may have to report to a probation officer. They may have to obey travel restrictions, submit to searches, attend treatment, avoid weapons, and comply with other conditions imposed by the court. And for a person with a terrorism conviction, supervised release is supposed to be a safety net, but it does have limits. A probation officer cannot watch someone every hour of every day. Supervision depends on conditions, compliance, risk assessment, home visits, communication, and the ability to detect warning signs before they become action. And this brings us back to the public controversy. How did this guy get out of prison early? Well, it turns out that he got out of jail early under a loophole. While in federal prison, Jalloh completed a drug treatment program. Even though his terrorism-related conviction should have disqualified him from that benefit, he somehow was able to get it anyway. And after he completed the drug-related program, his prison term was shortened. The Bureau of Prisons now says that that loophole in policy allowed the credit to apply to Jalloh, and that the agency has since changed its policies to prevent inmates with terrorism-related convictions from receiving that kind of release benefit. Despite what has been publicly released on this case, though, there are still gaps in the publicly available record between Jalloh's release in December of 24 and the shooting in March of 2026. Some of that may emerge through official reports later, but some may never be fully public. What we do know is that a probation officer visited Jalloh's Sterling, Virginia home every 6 months and had last been there in November of 2025, before the shooting. And that's according to an affidavit filed in the case against the man now accused of supplying Jalloh with the gun. Yeah, listen, more on the gun purchase in just a second, okay? We also know that Jalloh was reportedly taking online classes at Old Dominion, and that may help explain a connection to the actual university. But how often he was on the campus is unclear right now. The murder weapon, however, became a clearer investigative thread because as a convicted felon, Jalloh could not lawfully possess a gun. But prosecutors say, well, he couldn't legally obtain one, but he obtained one anyway, so what gives? The weapon allegedly used in the shooting was a Glock 44, a .22 caliber pistol. Federal prosecutors later charged Kenya Chapman with illegally selling the gun to Jalloh. According to the DOJ, the gun had been stolen from a vehicle in Newport News roughly a year earlier, and it was then sold to Jalloh just days before the attack. And that transfer chain is crucial because it shows how legal prohibitions can fail when a firearm moves through an illegal market. Because a background check can stop a prohibited person from buying a gun through lawful channels, but it cannot stop a stolen gun from being sold illegally. So, by March 12th, prosecutors say 3 things collided in Jalloh's case that should never have come together: a documented history of extremist interest in military targets, access to Old Dominion, and an illegally obtained firearm. And once these 3 things came together, Jalloh then walked into Constant Hall.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Give me a break, give me a break. Break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. Give me a break, give me a break. Break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. That chocolate crispy taste gonna make your day. And wherever you go, you'll hear the people say, give me a break, give me a break. Break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. Have a break. Have a Kit Kat.
It was just after 10:40 a.m. and the ROTC classroom session was nearly over when a man walked in. Cadet Samuel Reinberg would later recall that the man looked nervous as he stood in the doorway and asked, "Is this the ROTC classroom or is this a seminar?" At the time, it sounded like a lost student looking for the right class or maybe someone who was early for the next class. But investigators would later view that moment and that question very differently because the question itself suggests that Jalloh wasn't simply looking for any classroom. He was looking for this specific ROTC classroom. At first, no one responded to the man, but the man asked again. And then Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah and Cadet Cecilia Faso quietly indicated that yes, this was ROTC. The man nodded, and then, as the clock struck 10:43 a.m., everything changed. Witnesses said the man shouted, "Allahu Akbar," reached into his waistband, pulled out a Glock 44 pistol, and opened fire. The first shots were directed toward Lieutenant Colonel Shah and then towards the cadets, mostly aiming towards the ones sitting in the front row. For a brief moment, several students struggled to process what they were seeing. Cadet O'Shea Bego later recalled wondering whether it might somehow be a drill. The class had recently discussed force protection, but reality quickly set in as cadets hit the floor. Lieutenant Colonel Shah, though, he didn't hesitate. He immediately moved toward the gunman, closing the gap and bear-hugging the assailant. It was evident that Shah relied on his training and his instinct. He understood the gunman needed to be stopped. Cadet Jair Utarde later said that if Shah had not lunged at the attacker, he might not be alive today. As Shah struggled with the gunman in the upright position, Shah was able to turn the assailant away from the students. And that's when Cadet Luis Ancheta moved in. During the fight, Ancheta was shot near the sternum. Later, he described feeling the impact and initially thinking, okay, it's just a graze. His next thought was simple, though. I can keep going, and he did. Despite being shot, he pulled out his folding tactical knife and joined the struggle that was now on the floor. Cadet Jeremy Rawlinson also joined the fight now, and then there was some other cadets who joined. Now, while punches and elbows flew, Cadet Wesley Myers focused on something else, the gun. Because even with multiple people on top of him, the shooter still had a hand on the weapon. Myers later described forcing his finger between the gunman's hand and the pistol, trying to pry it free while also attempting to clear the final round from the chamber. Cadet Rawlinson was also putting his hand on the slide to keep the weapon from functioning properly. At that point, the cadets did everything they could to stop him. They were hitting the gunman with fists, elbows. At one point, someone even grabbed a metal water bottle. They overwhelmed the gunman with sheer force. Meanwhile, the gunman was underneath them, still fighting for control of the weapon. No one knew whether another round would fire. No one knew whether he had another weapon hidden somewhere. No one knew whether anyone else was involved. The only thing they knew for certain was that he had to be stopped, and somehow they stopped him. When the struggle finally ended, Mohamed Jalloh was dead. 2 cadets had been wounded, and Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah had suffered fatal injuries. In an instant, the atmosphere in the room changed again. The cadets transformed from fighters to first responders. As they realized that Lieutenant Colonel Shah had been shot, Cadet Samuel Reinberg found a gunshot wound to Shah's upper right thigh. Rawlinson handed over his belt for a tourniquet. Myers went to help Ancheta, who, as you recall, had been shot near the sternum. Other cadets assisted the wounded and secured the scene. And listen, yes, ROTC cadets are trained on first aid. They do learn tourniquets. They practice self-aid buddy care. They rehearse emergencies and control environments. But training is different when the person bleeding is not a mannequin. It's your actual professor, your classmate, your friend. But despite the fear that these cadets must have felt, they acted anyway. Outside the classroom, Old Dominion moved into emergency response as alerts went out to the community. Emergency sirens rang, law enforcement converged on campus, students sheltered in place, and parents began receiving messages about a shooting at the university. And as the stillness of the violence settled in, Classes were quietly canceled, Constant Hall was shut down, and the campus community began absorbing the facts in waves as the news rang out. A shooting inside an ROTC classroom had left Lieutenant Colonel Shah dead, 2 cadets wounded, the gunman was also dead. And then the suspect's name surfaced, Mohamed Bailor Jalloh. For most of the public, that name meant nothing to them. For federal authorities, though, it meant something very different, because almost immediately, the shooting stopped looking like a campus tragedy and started looking like the possible culmination of a threat they thought had been neutralized years earlier. In the immediate aftermath, authorities investigated the Old Dominion shooting as an act of terrorism, and a terrorist classification can oftentimes be misunderstood, so let's be clear. Terrorism cases can involve formal networks, coordinated plots, or lone actors motivated by extremist ideology. The publicly available record points mostly toward Jalloh as an operational lone actor. But caveat, he's one with a documented history of extremist ideology and a prior conviction for attempting to support ISIL. The strongest public evidence of targeting is the question that he asked before opening fire. Is this the ROTC classroom? That matters because it connects the target to the ideology described in his earlier federal conviction case. And that is why many people do not view this as random campus violence. They actually view it as a continuation of a threat federal authorities already investigated a decade earlier. And that part is why the military awards that followed carry so much meaning. After the shooting, the Army awarded 8 ODU cadets with meritorious service medals. 2 wounded cadets received Purple Hearts. Lieutenant Colonel Shah was posthumously awarded the Purple Heart and the Legion of Merit. For many listeners, the Purple Heart is associated with overseas combat, but military award rules can also cover service members wounded or killed in qualifying terrorist attacks that occur stateside. By awarding Purple Hearts, the Army was making clear that it viewed the wounded cadets and Shah as military personnel harmed by enemy-related action. Now, let's be clear. The medals did not make the trauma disappear, but they did formally recognize what happened that day in Constant Hall. These cadets were not simply bystanders in a crime scene. They were attacked because of their connection to the military, and they responded with extraordinary courage. As the country learned more about Lieutenant Colonel Shah, the loss became more personal. He was not just an ROTC instructor killed at ODU. He was a 41-year-old military officer from Virginia who was there with his family. He had served in the Army for more than 2 decades. He had deployed. He had flown Apache helicopters. He returned to the university where his officer journey began, and he did so he could guide cadets beginning their careers. There's just something so painfully full circle about that. A young man goes through ODU's ROTC program, learns how to become an officer, spends years serving in dangerous places, and then returns to the same community to teach and pay it forward. And then he dies protecting the next generation. The cadets in that classroom did not describe Shah as someone who simply happened to be shot. They described him as the man who intervened, who bought them more time. And in active shooter situations, time is everything. A few seconds can change how many people escape, how many people hide, how quickly someone reaches the attacker, and how many shots are fired before the gun is controlled. Since Shah disrupted Jalloh in those opening moments, then his final act did not only reflect courage, it created opportunity, and the cadets used that opportunity to act. And though Lieutenant Colonel Shah was killed, he was killed while leading his troops. In the days following the shooting, Brandon Shah was honored through multiple ceremonies. A public viewing and federal service were held in Portsmouth on March 21st. The following day, hundreds gathered at ODU's Chartway Arena for a public celebration of life. And less than 2 weeks later, the Army and ODU held an additional military tribute complete with a traditional 21-gun salute, ensuring that the officer who had devoted his life to service was remembered by both the military and university communities he loved.
Need a laptop that's built to perform and designed to last all day? Select Windows 11 PCs starting at $499.99 are now at Best Buy. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
Understanding Mohamed Jalloh is not about centering him over the people he harmed. It's about understanding the warning signs, the decisions, and the system that existed around him. When Jalloh appeared in federal court in 2017, prosecutors viewed him as dangerous, and they asked for a significantly longer sentence. According to the AP News, his defense attorneys presented a very different picture of him, though. They emphasized substance abuse, emotional instability, remorse, and the possibility of rehabilitation. They pointed to a letter in which Jalloh rejected terrorism, expressed regret, and blamed some of his behavior on drug and alcohol use following a difficult breakup. And I'll be honest, reading those arguments after what happened at ODU is difficult. But as a legal professional, I kind of get it, because sentencing often forces judges to weigh two competing possibilities. Is the defendant an ongoing threat to public safety? Or is the defendant someone who committed serious crimes during a period of instability and he can somehow be rehabilitated? In Jalloh's case, the judge imposed an 11-year sentence, which is substantial prison time, but it's far less than prosecutors had requested. Later, prison programming and policy decisions reduced the amount of time that he actually spent in custody. And when he walked into an ROTC classroom, that earlier sentencing debate took on an entirely different meaning. Because one of the hardest realities in terrorism cases is that ideology can be hidden, remorse can be genuine or strategic, compliance can reflect rehabilitation, or simply it can reflect the ability to follow rules while being watched. Because in the end, supervision can only evaluate what it can see. None of this excuses what happened, but it does help explain why these cases remain so difficult long after a sentence is imposed. So what's the status of this case now? Well, the firearm seller case remains one of the few remaining paths for courtroom accountability, and we shall see how that plays out. As for the early release issue, the Bureau of Prisons has already acknowledged that they have closed the loophole that applied to Jalloh and says that it has changed its policy going forward. But there's a question that is left kind of open-ended. As the shooting refers to universities, or universities as a whole, they're left grappling with difficult questions of their own after the shooting. They're left with questions such as how should schools evaluate applicants with serious criminal histories? What additional scrutiny, if any, is appropriate for individuals with terrorism-related convictions? And how do institutions balance rehabilitation with public service? I mean, there are no easy answers. You know, another debate emerged just weeks after the shooting when ODU faculty members resurfaced a 2024 complaint about classroom security, specifically in Constant Hall. Some argued that concerns about door locks and active shooter preparedness had not been fully addressed back in 2024. However, university officials strongly disagreed, releasing records showing that the concerns back in 2024 had been reviewed and that safety assessments had been conducted. Whether any of those measures would have changed what happened on March 12th is impossible to know, but it does raise a broader question. Should universities with large ROTC populations consider dedicated, access-controlled ROTC spaces? You see, Constant Hall, as I read about it, was not an ROTC-only building. It housed many different classes and academic programs. But at schools with hundreds of cadets and midshipmen, there may be value in locating ROTC offices, classrooms, and training areas within more secure sections of campus. Again, there's no way to know whether that would have changed the outcome here. But it is a conversation that I suspect many universities will be having in the years ahead. Because in the end, service members accept that military life carries risks. Deployments carry risk. Training carries risk. Combat carries risk. But ROTC classrooms, they're supposed to be places where future officers prepare for danger, not places where they encounter it. And that is why the moral center of this story is not Mohamed Jalloh. It is Brandon Shah. It is Louis Anchetta. It is Jeremy Rawlinson. It is Wesley Myers. It is Samuel Reinberg. It is Cecilia Faso. It is O'Shea Bego. It is Jair Utante. It is every single cadet in that room who had only seconds to decide what survival required. Not everyone reacted the same way. Some took cover, some fought, some rendered aid, some secured the scene. But together, they survived as a unit. That was not an accident. That was training. That was leadership. That was the culture that Lieutenant Colonel Shah and the ROTC cadre built long before that gunman walked through the door. Cadet Rawlinson later reflected on Lieutenant Colonel Shah, and he said that Lieutenant Colonel Shah got to see the training that he had poured into his students put into action. The cadets did not panic. They switched over. They acted. And in the worst possible moment, Lieutenant Colonel Shah watched his cadets become the officers he had been preparing them to be. At the beginning of this episode, I said that there is a moment before violence when everything still feels ordinary. But there's another moment that comes afterward. The moment when the shooting stops, when the gunfire ends, when the room grows quiet again. But nothing will ever feel normal again. For the cadets inside Constant Hall, that moment will likely stay with them forever. They survived, but Lieutenant Colonel Shah did not. As I've pored over the interviews and listened to the cadets describe what happened that morning, one thing stood out to me above everything else. They have not forgotten who moved first. When the shooting started, Shah didn't run away from the danger. He moved toward it. And in those first few seconds, he gave his cadets something priceless: time. Time to react, time to fight back, time to survive. In the middle of fear, confusion, bloodshed, and chaos, this became more than a story about a terrorist attack on an ROTC classroom. It became a story about courage under pressure, about the cost of leadership, and about a group of young men and women who refused to give up when everything around them was falling apart. Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shah spent more than 2 decades serving his country and teaching others what leadership required. One of the sayings he was known for was simple: be bold, be quick, be gone. On March 12, 2026, he lived those words one final time. And the cadets he mentored, the future officers he helped to shape, are now carrying that lesson forward. That may be the most enduring part of Shah's legacy. Not the medals, not the rank on his uniform, but the lives he influenced, the leaders he helped create, and the courage they showed when it mattered most. True Crime Army, this week's episode has been heavy on my heart. But listen, researching and watching people not only talk about Lieutenant Colonel Shah, but watching how courageous those cadets in that classroom were, and then to realize that many of them commissioned in May and are now serving beside us is truly amazing. As I mentioned, there were 2 memorial services for Lieutenant Colonel Shah, and I'm going to link those services in my show notes if you want to go and watch them, which I highly encourage you to go and do. I'm also going to link the 17-minute video that was posted by the Army ROTC YouTube page, and in that 17-minute video, you will be able to watch cadets who were in the classroom that day describe how everything went down. I'd encourage everyone to go and watch those videos. I will link them in the show notes. All right, as I end today, I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for your continued support and for listening and pressing play every week. Please be safe this summer. My sources for this episode include various press releases from the Department of Justice and the Army and ODU, and articles featured in the Associated Press, the ODU website, NBC Washington, New York Post, and public statements from federal and university officials. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.
Are you one of those media strategy people clicking through slides, scrolling spreadsheets? Yes? Good. This is for you. Because on Spotify, there's an audience that's different, locked in, loyal, invested. They're called fans. Fans don't just listen to music, they feel seen by it, like it belongs to them. So when your brand shows up on Spotify, that's who you're talking to. And you're right next to artists like me, Lizzo. So, are you ready to talk to fans? Spotify advertising. You're among fans.
The most memorable gifts aren't found, they're made. Zazzle is a custom marketplace where you pick any product, a mug, a card, a tote, a phone case, and make it personal. A photo, a name, an inside joke. The kind of gift that actually fits the person. That's what 30 million customers have been coming back to Zazzle for over 20 years to find. Right now, save 25% on your first order at Zazzle.com. That's Zazzle.com. Make it Zamazing.